I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for 37 years now. Something I've never spoken about to anyone, not even my own children. But I can't take it to my grave. I can't. When I was 19 years old, my parents sold me. Not figuratively, literally sold me, like cattle, to a man 3 times my age. And for 5 years, I lived a nightmare that most people couldn't even imagine. This is the story of how I survived what should have destroyed me, how I found strength I never knew I had, and how I eventually escaped a prison disguised as a marriage. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how desperate things were. How desperate we were. It was 1987, and our small farming community was dying. The drought had lasted 3 years straight, turning our fields into cracked earth that looked like broken pottery. My dad, he was a proud man, the kind who'd rather starve than ask for help. But pride doesn't fill empty stomachs, and we hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. I was sitting on our front porch, watching the dust devils dance across what used to be our cornfield, when I heard my parents arguing inside. Their voices were hushed, but the walls were thin, and desperation has a way of making whispers carry. "We can't keep going like this, Margaret," my father was saying. His voice cracked on the word can't. I'd never heard him sound so broken before. "Lisa's getting thinner every day. So is Rebecca. Hell, we all are." My mother was crying. I could hear it in the way she breathed between words. "There has to be another way, Frank. There has to be." "What way?" "We've sold everything worth selling. The bank's coming for the farm next month. At least this way, she'll be fed. She'll have a roof over her head." That's when I realized they were talking about me. My stomach dropped like a stone in a well. "He's a good man," my father continued, trying to convince himself as much as my mother. "Old Buck Morrison, he's got money, he's got land. He says he'll take care of her." Buck Morrison. I knew him by sight, a weathered man in his 60s who owned the largest ranch in 3 counties. He'd lost his wife 2 years prior and had been living alone since. I'd seen him at church sometimes, always sitting in the back pew, always leaving before anyone could approach him. "She's our daughter, Frank. Our baby girl. And she'll die if we don't do something." My father's voice was final, the way it got when he'd made up his mind about something. "Morrison offered enough to pay off our debts and keep us going until the rains come back. If they come back." I crept closer to the door, my bare feet silent on the worn wooden floor. Through the crack, I could see my mother doubled over at the kitchen table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My father stood behind her, his hands hovering over her back like he wanted to comfort her but didn't know how. "How do we even bring this up to her?" my mother whispered. "We don't give her a choice," my father said quietly. "We can't afford to." The world seemed to tilt sideways. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. They were going to sell me. Actually sell me to that old man like I was livestock. I backed away from the door and ran to the barn, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I climbed up to the hayloft, my secret place since I was little, and just sat there, trying to process what I'd heard. See, you have to understand something about rural communities back then. When people were desperate, they did desperate things. And sometimes those things were justified in ways that made sense to everyone except the person they were happening to. My younger sister Rebecca found me there an hour later. She was only 16, but she had this way of knowing when something was wrong. She climbed up and sat beside me without saying a word at first. "They're talking about you downstairs," she finally said, her voice small. "I know. Are you really going to marry old Buck Morrison?" The word marry made it sound like I had a choice. Like this was some romantic fairy tale instead of a business transaction. Looks like it. Rebecca was quiet for a long time. Then she said, maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe he'll be kind to you. I wanted to believe that. God, how I wanted to believe that. But even at 19, I wasn't naive. I knew what marriage meant. I knew what would be expected of me. And the thought of that old man's hands on me, his body pressed against mine. I had to bite my lip to keep from being sick right there in the hay. That evening, my parents sat me down at our kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd done my homework every night for 12 years, where my mother had taught me to knead bread and my father had helped me with my math. Now it felt like a courtroom where my sentence was about to be read. Lisa, my father began, his voice carefully controlled, we need to talk to you about your future. My future. Like I was going away to college or starting some exciting new job. We've been talking to Buck Morrison, my mother added, her eyes red from crying. He's asked for your hand in marriage. The way she said it, you'd think it was an honor. You'd think some prince had chosen me over all the other girls in the kingdom. And we've accepted, my father finished. Just like that. No discussion. No asking what I wanted. No consideration for the fact that I was a human being with my own thoughts and feelings and dreams. What if I say no? I asked quietly. My parents exchanged a look. My father cleared his throat. That's not really an option, sweetheart. We need this arrangement. The family needs it. Arrangement. Not marriage. Not love. Not even affection. An arrangement. When? I whispered. Next month. Right after harvest season ends. 1 month. I had 1 month left of being myself before I became someone else's property. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my sister's steady breathing beside me. I thought about running away, but where would I go? I had no money, no car, no skills that could support me in the outside world. And even if I did run, my family would still starve. My sacrifice would be meaningless. So I made a decision that night. I decided to go through with it. Not because I wanted to, but because sometimes love means sacrificing yourself for the people who matter most. Sometimes being strong means accepting that you're powerless. But I also made another decision that night, one that would sustain me through the hell that was coming. I decided that no matter what happened to my body, no matter what Buck Morrison did to me or made me do, he would never own my mind. Never own my spirit. Never own the part of me that was truly me. I had no idea then just how hard it would be to keep that promise to myself. I had no idea what I was really walking into. But I was about to find out, and it would test every ounce of strength I thought I had. The wedding was set for October 15th, 1987. And that date was racing toward me like a freight train with no brakes. That month passed like a fever dream. Some days crawled by so slowly I could feel every second ticking away, and others flew past in a blur of preparations I had no heart for. My mother tried to make it feel normal, like any other wedding, but we all knew better. She spent our last bit of savings on fabric for a dress. White cotton, simple but clean. I stood on a wooden crate in our living room while she pinned the hem, both of us pretending this was a happy occasion. Her hands shook as she worked, and more than once I felt warm drops fall on my shoulders. She was crying, but we never talked about it. "You look beautiful," she whispered when she finally stepped back to admire her work. I caught my reflection in the old mirror hanging on the wall. I did look different, older somehow, like the girl I'd been was already disappearing. My dark hair was longer then, falling past my shoulders in waves. My face was thin from the months of not eating enough, but my eyes looked hollow. like I was already gone. Buck Morrison came by the house twice during that month. The first time was to discuss arrangements, as my father put it. I was sent to my room like a child while the men talked about my future downstairs. I pressed my ear to the floor and caught fragments of their conversation, words like dowry and responsibilities and expectations. They were negotiating the terms of my sale, and I wasn't even allowed to be present. The second time he came, he wanted to see me. To get acquainted, he said. I'll never forget that afternoon. I was hanging laundry on the line behind our house when I heard his truck pull up. My stomach immediately knotted with dread. My mother called for me, her voice artificially cheerful, and I had no choice but to go inside. Buck Morrison was sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking completely at ease. He was a big man, not fat, but solid, with hands like ham hocks and shoulders that filled out his work shirt. His hair was gray and thinning, his face weathered from decades in the sun. When he smiled at me, I noticed his teeth were yellow and crooked. There she is, he said, standing up. Come here, girl. Let me get a look at you. I walked over slowly, my legs feeling like they were moving through thick mud. He reached out and took my chin in his hand, tilting my face up toward the light. His fingers were rough and calloused, and they smelled like tobacco and leather. Pretty little thing, he murmured, more to my parents than to me. Good bones. Strong looking. She'll do fine. He was inspecting me like livestock, checking my teeth and my figure and deciding whether I was worth the price he was paying. I wanted to slap his hand away, to run screaming from the house, but I stood there and took it because I had to. She's a good girl, my father said quickly. Hardworking. Knows how to cook and clean and tend to things. I'm sure she is. Buck's eyes never left my face. We'll get along just fine, won't we, Lisa? I nodded because words wouldn't come. My throat felt like it was closing up. I've got some nice things waiting for you at the house, he continued. New dresses, pretty things. You'll want for nothing as my wife. Wife. The word sounded foreign and wrong in his mouth. This wasn't about being a wife, this was about being owned. After he left that day, I threw up behind the barn. My body was already rebelling against what was coming, but there was no escape. The night before the wedding, Rebecca crawled into bed next to me. We hadn't shared a bed since we were little kids, but that night she curled up against my side like she used to do during thunderstorms. I'm scared, she whispered in the dark. I know. Me too. What if he hurts you? I'd been wondering the same thing, but hearing her say it out loud made it more real somehow. I'll be okay, I lied. I'm stronger than I look. Promise you'll write to me. Promise you'll come visit. I promise. Another lie. I had no idea if I'd be allowed to do either of those things. We lay there in silence for a while, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Finally, Rebecca fell asleep, but I stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling and trying to memorize every detail of my childhood bedroom. The water stain in the corner that looked like a rabbit. The way the moonlight came through the curtains. The sound of my sister breathing beside me. I was saying goodbye to everything I'd ever known. The wedding was held at the small church in town. There were maybe 20 people there, mostly Buck's friends and business associates. He'd made it clear this wasn't meant to be a celebration, just a formality to make things legal. I walked down the aisle in my simple white dress, my father's arm linked through mine. He was supposed to be giving me away, but it felt more like he was delivering me. His hand was trembling, and I could hear his breath catching in his throat. When we reached the altar, he kissed my forehead and whispered, I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry. Those were the kindest words anyone had spoken to me in weeks. The ceremony itself was a blur. I said the words I was supposed to say, but they felt like they were coming from someone else's mouth. "I do" came out as barely a whisper. When the preacher pronounced us man and wife, Buck kissed me, a hard, possessive kiss that tasted like cigarettes and made my skin crawl. The reception was held at Buck's ranch. His house was bigger than I'd expected, a sprawling single-story place with a wraparound porch and enough land that you couldn't see the neighbors. It should have been impressive, but to me it just looked like a prison with nice landscaping. There was food and music, but I couldn't eat anything. My stomach was twisted in knots, and everything tasted like sawdust. I sat in a corner and watched the guests enjoy themselves, feeling like I was already a ghost haunting my own life. My parents left early. My mother hugged me goodbye, clinging to me so tightly I thought she might never let go. She whispered in my ear, "Be strong, my darling. Remember who you are." But as I watched their car disappear down the dusty road, I wondered if I would remember. I wondered if the girl they were leaving behind would still exist by morning. As the evening wore on, the guests gradually began to leave. Each goodbye felt like another door closing, another connection to my old life being severed. Finally, it was just me and Buck, standing in his living room as the last car drove away. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Buck poured himself a glass of whiskey and offered me one. I shook my head. "Nervous?" he asked, settling into his favorite chair. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "That's natural. All brides get nervous on their wedding night." He took a long sip of his drink. "But you don't need to worry. I'll be gentle with you." The way he said it, like he was doing me a favor, made my blood run cold. I realized in that moment that he genuinely thought this was normal. He thought he was being kind. "Why don't you go get ready for bed?" he said softly. "I've put some things in the bedroom for you. Take your time." I walked down the hallway to what was now supposed to be our bedroom, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. The room was larger than my family's entire living room, with a massive bed that dominated the space. On the dresser, he laid out a white nightgown, sheer and delicate and completely inappropriate for a 19-year-old girl who felt more like a child than a woman. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at that nightgown for a long time. This was it. This was the moment when my old life officially ended and this new nightmare began. In a few minutes, Buck Morrison would come through that door expecting to claim what he paid for. And I would have to let him. I changed into the nightgown with shaking hands, caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and looked away quickly. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Then I heard his footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, and I knew my wedding day, and my childhood, were officially over. That first night broke something inside me that I didn't even know could break. Buck was gentle, like he'd promised. But gentle doesn't make it right. Gentle doesn't erase the fact that I was 19 years old and terrified, lying there like a sacrifice while a man old enough to be my grandfather took what he paid for. His hands were careful, his voice was soft, but none of that mattered because I didn't want to be there. Every touch felt like a violation, even the tender ones. When it was over, he held me close and stroked my hair like I was a pet he was fond of. "See? That wasn't so bad, was it?" he whispered against my ear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw my way out of that bed and run until my legs gave out. Instead, I lay there perfectly still and said nothing, because what was there to say? That it was bad? That every second of it made me feel like I was dying inside? What would be the point? He fell asleep quickly, his arm heavy across my waist like a chain. I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to him snore, feeling trapped under the weight of his body and the weight of my new reality. This was my life now. This bed, this man, this suffocating sense of being owned by someone else. The next few weeks established what would become our routine. Buck would leave early in the morning to work on the ranch, and I'd spend my days alone in that big house, trying to figure out how to be a wife to someone I didn't love and couldn't even bring myself to like. He'd given me a list of expectations, written out in his careful handwriting like a job description. I was to keep the house clean, cook his meals, do his laundry, and be available for his needs whenever he wanted. In return, he'd provide for me, clothe me, and treat me with respect and kindness. The irony of that last part wasn't lost on me. The house itself was beautiful, I'll give him that. Much nicer than anything my family had ever lived in. There were 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with modern appliances, and a living room with furniture that actually matched. He'd bought me new clothes, dresses and skirts and blouses that fit perfectly because he'd somehow guessed my size correctly. Everything was clean and comfortable and completely soulless. I felt like I was living in a museum of someone else's life. The worst part wasn't the nights, though those were bad enough. The worst part was the daytime loneliness. Buck owned thousands of acres, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I had no car, no phone access without his permission, and no way to contact my family unless he allowed it. I was completely isolated, completely dependent on him for everything. He controlled every aspect of my existence, and he did it all with a smile and a gentle voice that made me feel crazy for resenting it. "You seem sad, honey," he said one evening about a month after the wedding. We were sitting at the dinner table, him reading a farming magazine while I picked at my food. "Is there something you need? Something that would make you happier?" How do you answer a question like that? What I needed was my freedom. What I needed was to be 19 years old and figuring out my own life instead of living someone else's version of what my life should be. What I needed was to not have to spread my legs for a man I barely knew just because he'd bought the right to my body. "I miss my family," I said instead, because that was the only safe answer. "Well, why don't you write them a letter? I'll mail it for you tomorrow." Even my correspondence with my own family had to go through him. He read every letter I wrote and every letter I received. Privacy was another thing I'd signed away without realizing it. 2 months in, I got my first real glimpse of what Buck was capable of when he was angry. I'd been feeling sick that morning, nauseous and dizzy, and I'd burned his breakfast. Just slightly charred the edges of his eggs, nothing dramatic. But when he sat down and saw his plate, his whole demeanor changed. "What's this?" he asked quietly, his voice deadly calm. "I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well and—" "I work 14 hours a day to provide for you," he interrupted, still speaking in that terrifyingly quiet tone. "All I ask in return is that you take care of the house and cook my meals properly." Is that too much to ask? "No, sir. I'm sorry. Let me make you new ones." "Sit down." I sat. "Look at me." I looked at him, and for the first time since I'd known him, I was genuinely afraid. His eyes were cold and hard, completely different from the kindly old man who'd been so gentle with me. "I've been patient with you because I know this is an adjustment. But patience has limits, Lisa. I paid good money for a wife, not a child who can't handle simple responsibilities. Do we understand each other?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "I can't hear you." "Yes, sir. We understand each other." "Good." Just like that, the moment passed and he was smiling again. "Now go make me fresh eggs, and let's not have this problem again." That was the day I realized that Buck's gentleness wasn't kindness, it was control. He was nice to me as long as I did exactly what he wanted, exactly how he wanted it done. But cross him, disappoint him, show any sign of independence or resistance, and that mask would slip. The burned eggs incident taught me to be more careful, but it also taught me that I was living with a man who saw me as property he'd invested in. And like any investment, I was expected to perform according to his expectations. Winter came early that year, and with it came an isolation so complete I sometimes went days without hearing another human voice besides Buck's. The ranch was snowed in for weeks at a time, and even Buck couldn't always make it out to check on the cattle. We were trapped together in that house, and I started to feel like I was disappearing. I'd catch glimpses of myself in mirrors and be startled by what I saw. I was getting thinner despite eating regularly. My face was pale and drawn, and my eyes had that hollow look I noticed on my wedding day. I looked like a ghost of myself. Buck noticed too. "You need to take better care of yourself," he told me one evening as we sat by the fireplace. "You're looking peaked." "I'm fine," I lied. "No, you're not. You're depressed. I can see it." He set down his book and looked at me seriously. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. The adjustment period is always difficult. But you need to try harder to make the best of things. Make the best of things." Like being sold into marriage was just one of life's little challenges that required a positive attitude. "Maybe in the spring, we can have your family over for dinner," he offered, like he was doing me an enormous favor. I wanted to tell him that having my family over for dinner wouldn't fix the fact that I felt like I was slowly dying inside. It wouldn't fix the fact that I cried myself to sleep most nights, or that I felt like a stranger in my own body, or that every day felt exactly like the one before it with no hope of anything ever changing. But I smiled and thanked him because that's what good wives do. They're grateful for small mercies and they don't complain about the big injustices. That night, after Buck fell asleep, I snuck out of bed and went to the kitchen. I sat at the table in the dark and allowed myself to really cry for the first time since my wedding day. I cried for my old life, for my freedom, for the girl I used to be who had dreams and opinions and a future that belonged to her. I cried until there were no tears left, and then I wiped my face and went back to bed. Because what else was there to do? I was trapped, completely and utterly trapped, and crying wasn't going to change that. But as I lay there next to Buck's sleeping form, something started to shift inside me. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more determined. I was trapped, yes, but I wasn't dead. Not yet. And as long as I wasn't dead, there was still a part of me that belonged to me and me alone. I just had to figure out how to keep that part alive. The second year was when I started to fight back, even though I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. It started with small things. I'd forget to starch his shirts the way he liked them. I'd add a little too much salt to his food. I'd take longer in the shower than necessary, using up the hot water before he got home. Tiny rebellions that probably seem pathetic now, but they were the only power I had left. Buck noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "Lisa," he said one evening after finding his favorite shirt wrinkled in the closet, "is there something we need to discuss?" "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He sat down on the bed and patted the space next to him. "Come here." I sat, keeping space between us, but he reached over and pulled me closer. His touch was still gentle, but there was steel underneath it now. "I've been very patient with you," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "I've given you time to adjust, I've been understanding about your moods. But this passive-aggressive behavior has to stop." "I don't know what you're talking about." His grip on my arm tightened just enough to make his point. "Don't lie to me. I'm not stupid, and neither are you. You're testing me, seeing how far you can push before I push back. Well, you're about to find out." That night, he was rougher than usual. Not violent exactly, but demanding in a way that left no room for my feelings or comfort. It was his way of reminding me who was in charge, and it worked. For a while. But something had awakened in me, and I couldn't put it back to sleep. Maybe it was turning 20, Or maybe it was just that human beings can only be pushed so far before they start pushing back. Either way, I found myself doing things that scared even me. I started reading his mail when he wasn't looking. I memorized his daily routines. I paid attention to where he kept his money, his keys, his important papers. I wasn't planning anything specific. I told myself I was just being observant, but some deep part of me was gathering information like I was preparing for war. The breaking point came in March of my second year. I'd been feeling sick again, the same nausea and dizziness I'd had before, and this time it lasted for weeks. I was tired all the time, couldn't keep food down, and my monthly cycle had stopped completely. Buck insisted on taking me to the doctor in town, the first time I'd left the ranch in months. Dr. Peterson was an old family physician who'd probably delivered half the babies in the county. He was thorough and kind, and after examining me, he sat down with Buck and me to deliver the news. "Congratulations," he said with a genuine smile. "You're going to be parents." About 8 weeks along, I'd say. The world tilted sideways. Pregnant. I was pregnant with Buck Morrison's child. Buck was thrilled. On the drive home, he talked excitedly about names and nurseries and how he'd always wanted children, but his first wife had never been able to conceive. He was already planning our baby's entire future, whether it would take over the ranch, what schools it would attend, what kind of person it would become. I sat in the passenger seat and felt like I was suffocating. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection for a long time. My hand went automatically to my still flat stomach, and I tried to imagine a baby growing inside me. Buck's baby. A child who would tie me to this man and this life forever. I thought about my own mother, how she protected me and loved me even when she couldn't save me. I thought about the kind of mother I wanted to be versus the kind of mother I could be in this situation. How could I raise a child to be strong and independent when I had no strength or independence myself? But there was something else too, something I hadn't expected. Despite everything, despite the circumstances and my feelings about Buck, there was a tiny spark of something protective already growing inside me along with that baby. This child didn't ask to be conceived this way, didn't deserve to pay for the sins of its parents. Buck was gentler with me after that, treating me like I was made of glass. He hired a woman from town to come help with the heavy cleaning, insisted I rest more, brought me special foods he thought would be good for the baby. In his mind, I'd finally fulfilled my primary purpose as his wife. "I'm so proud of you," he told me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. His hand rested on my belly in a gesture that was both tender and possessive. "You're going to be such a good mother." But as the weeks passed and my body changed, I started having dreams. Not the usual anxiety dreams I'd been having since the wedding, but vivid, specific dreams about running. In these dreams, I was always carrying a baby, always being chased, always looking for a safe place to hide. I'd wake up from these dreams with my heart pounding and a strange sense of urgency I couldn't explain. It was like my subconscious was trying to tell me something my conscious mind wasn't ready to hear. The truth hit me one afternoon when I was folding tiny baby clothes Buck had bought. As I held up a little yellow sleeper, I realized I didn't want my child to grow up the way I had, powerless, traded away, taught to accept whatever life handed them without question. I wanted my baby to have choices. I wanted my baby to know they were worth more than whatever price someone else put on them. And I realized that if I wanted that for my child, I had to want it for myself too. That's when I started planning for real. I began keeping track of Buck's schedule more carefully. He went to town every Tuesday for supplies and stayed for a few hours to drink with his friends. Every other Thursday, he drove to the county seat for business meetings. On Sundays, he sometimes visited his brother on the other side of the valley. I started saving money, $1 here, loose change there, anything I could skim from the grocery money without him noticing. I hid it in a mason jar buried behind the chicken coop. I paid attention to the radio when Buck wasn't around, listening for news about the outside world I'd almost forgotten existed. I learned which bus routes went through town, where they went, how much tickets cost. Most importantly, I started exercising. Not obviously, Buck would have been suspicious, but I'd do stretches and walk around the property when he was gone, trying to build up my strength and stamina. I told myself it was for the baby's health, but really it was preparation for something I couldn't yet name. The baby was due in October, and as summer turned to fall, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just the baby moving and growing, but something in my spirit. Some fundamental change in how I saw myself and my situation. I wasn't just Buck Morrison's wife anymore. I wasn't just my parents' sacrificial daughter. I was going to be someone's mother, and that meant I had to become someone worth following. One evening in late September, as I sat on the porch watching the leaves change colors, Buck came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. I looked out at the horizon, at the road that led away from this place, and for the first time in 2 years, I allowed myself to imagine walking down it. "Just thinking about the future," I said. "Good thoughts, I hope." "Yes," I said, and meant it. "Very good thoughts." What I didn't tell him was that those thoughts didn't include him. For the first time since my wedding day, I was imagining a future where I had control over my own life. Where my child would grow up free. I was imagining escape, and it felt like waking up from a very long nightmare. My daughter was born on October 12, 1989, and the moment I held her in my arms, everything changed. Buck had driven me to the hospital when my labor started, pacing the waiting room like an expectant father should. When Dr. Peterson finally let him in to meet his daughter, I watched his face transform with wonder and pride. He held her so carefully, this big rough man reduced to gentle whispers and tender touches. "She's perfect," he kept saying. "Just perfect." He named her Catherine, after his mother. I'd wanted to call her Hope, but by then I'd learned to pick my battles. Catherine was a good name, strong, dignified. And I could call her Kathy when we were alone. For the first few weeks after we came home, Buck was like a different person. He doted on both of us, bringing me flowers from the garden, taking over the night feedings so I could rest. He'd sit for hours just watching Kathy sleep, talking to her about the ranch and all the things he'd teach her when she got older. "She's going to be a real ranch girl," he'd say, bouncing her gently on his knee. "Gonna know how to ride before she can walk properly." But watching him with my daughter only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't the life I wanted for her. I didn't want her growing up thinking it was normal for men to own women, for fathers to sell daughters, for love to be conditional on obedience. I wanted her to know she was worth more than that. By the time Kathy was 3 months old, I'd perfected my plan. Buck's Tuesday trips to town had become as predictable as sunrise. He'd leave at 9 a.m. sharp, spend 2 hours getting supplies, then another 2 hours at Murphy's bar with his cronies. He'd roll home around 3 p.m., slightly drunk and in a good mood. That gave me 6 hours. More than enough time if everything went right. I'd been saving money for almost a year by then, and I had nearly $300 hidden in that mason jar. I'd memorized the bus schedules, figured out which route would take us farthest from Buck's reach. I'd even practiced packing, timing how long it took me to get our essentials together. The hardest part was the waiting. Every day I felt like Buck might notice something different about me, might see the determination I was trying so hard to hide. But he was so focused on the baby, so pleased with his little family, that he missed all the signs. The Tuesday I chose was gray and cold, with a storm threatening on the horizon. Perfect weather for disappearing. Buck left right on schedule, kissing me goodbye and telling me he'd bring back something special for dinner. "Maybe we'll celebrate tonight," he said with a wink. It's been long enough since the baby came. My stomach turned, but I smiled and waved him off like always. The moment his truck was out of sight, I went into action. I'd already laid out what we'd need: 2 small suitcases with clothes for both of us, diapers and formula for Kathy, and the manila envelope where I kept our important papers. I'd managed to get copies of both our birth certificates when Kathy was born, claiming I needed them for insurance purposes. I changed into my warmest clothes, bundled Kathy up in her winter coat, and loaded everything into the old pickup truck Buck kept for ranch work. He'd taught me to drive it the previous summer, thinking it would be helpful if I ever needed to run errands. He had no idea he was giving me the keys to our freedom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. This was it, the point of no return. Once I drove away from that ranch, there would be no going back. Buck would never forgive this betrayal, never stop looking for us. But as I looked at Kathy sleeping peacefully in her car seat, I knew I was making the right choice. Whatever happened next, at least she'd have a chance at a different kind of life. The drive to town took 40 minutes, and every mile felt like a small victory. I kept expecting to see Buck's truck coming the other direction, kept imagining him somehow knowing what I was doing and coming after us. But the road stayed empty, and we made it to the bus station without incident. The ticket agent was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who didn't ask questions when I bought 2 tickets to the city, one for me and one for Lap Child. The bus wouldn't leave for another hour, so I sat in the station with Kathy and tried to look calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. That hour was the longest of my life. Every time someone walked through the door, I was sure it would be Buck. Every car that drove past the window made me jump. But finally, they called for boarding, and I climbed onto that Greyhound bus with my daughter in my arms and everything we owned in 2 small suitcases. As the bus pulled away from the station, I pressed my face to the window and watched Buck's town disappear behind us. I was 21 years old, had $300 to my name, and was completely on my own with a 3-month-old baby. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt more alive than I had in 2 years. The bus took us to the state capitol, where I spent our first night of freedom in a cheap motel near the station. Kathy was fussy. The travel had disrupted her routine, but I didn't mind. Her crying was the sound of life continuing, of us still being here, still being free. I called my parents from a payphone the next morning. My mother answered, and when she heard my voice, she started crying immediately. "Lisa? Lisa, is that really you? Oh, honey, where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mama. We're fine. I left him." "We? You have a granddaughter. Her name is Catherine, and she's beautiful." My mother wept openly then, and I could hear my father in the background asking what was wrong. When she told him, I heard him curse, something he never did, and then he took the phone. "Where are you, baby girl? Do you need money? Do you need us to come get you?" They were still struggling financially, still barely keeping the farm going, but they were ready to drop everything to help me. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice, not just for me and Kathy, but for them too. They'd been carrying the guilt of selling me for 2 years, and now they could finally help make it right. But I didn't want their money or their rescue. I wanted to do this myself. "I'm okay, Daddy. I have a plan. I needed you to know we were safe. Buck's been calling here every day since you left," he said quietly. "He's furious. He's threatening all kinds of things. Let him threaten. He can't make me go back. He says you stole his truck. I borrowed it. It's parked at the bus station with the keys in it. He can come get it anytime he wants." My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm proud of you, Lisa. I'm so damn proud of you." Those words meant everything to me. For the first time since my wedding day, I felt like his daughter again instead of his mistake. I spent the next few weeks in a women's shelter while I looked for work in an apartment. It wasn't easy, few people wanted to hire a young mother with no recent work experience, but eventually I found a job waitressing at a diner near the university. The hours were long and the pay was terrible, but it was honest work that I'd chosen for myself. Kathy and I got a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. It wasn't much, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom down the hall we shared with 3 other tenants. But it was ours. Nobody could take it away from us, nobody could tell us we didn't deserve it. That first night in our own place, I sat on the floor with Kathy in my lap and looked around at our 4 walls, our secondhand furniture, our few possessions scattered around the room. We had so little, but it felt like everything. "This is home," I told her. "Our home. And nobody can ever sell us again." Years have passed since then. 37 years, to be exact. I'm 58 now, and Kathy is a successful lawyer with 2 kids of her own. She knows the truth about her father and how she came to be, because I never wanted her to live with the kind of secrets that nearly destroyed me. She's nothing like the ranch girl Buck imagined she'd become. She's strong and independent and fierce in all the ways I tried to teach her to be. She fights for other women who find themselves trapped in situations they can't escape. She's everything I hoped she'd be and more. Buck never stopped looking for us, not completely. Every few years, I'd get word through family that he'd been asking questions, following leads. But we disappeared into the anonymity of city life, and eventually the trail went cold. He died about 10 years ago, heart attack while working cattle. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Not relief, not sadness, not even satisfaction. He'd already become irrelevant to my life long before he died. Sometimes people ask me how I found the courage to leave. They act like I did something heroic, something extraordinary. But the truth is simpler than that. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because staying would have killed something essential in me, and I couldn't let my daughter inherit that kind of death. The courage came later, in the daily choice to build a life worth living. In working double shifts to pay for Kathy's school clothes. In going back to school myself when she was older, earning my GED and then a degree in social work. In helping other women find their own paths to freedom. The courage was in deciding that what happened to me didn't define what was possible for us. I still have that mason jar, by the way. It sits on my kitchen windowsill now, filled with wildflowers instead of escape money. Every time I look at it, I remember that desperate young woman who refused to give up, who saved quarters and dimes and hope until she had enough to buy a different future. I'm proud of her. I'm proud of the choice she made that cold Tuesday morning when she loaded her baby into a truck and drove toward freedom. That was the day my real life began.